Yo, what's up, people? This your boy P. Ross, back in the building once again. Right now, we got something new for y'all. We're about to do a classic movie review. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to let the homeboy JQ Vault come on in and do that. You know what I'm saying? All right, peace. What's up, players? It's your boy JQ Vault. You already heard the intro, so I'm going to go ahead and go into it. The first film we kicking off is a classic. From 1978, Academy Award winner for Best Picture, The Deer Hunter. Film stars Robert De Niro when he was in his prime. I say that now because we know he's a legend. He's making movies and everything now. I'm doing it with my boy Riker, pet kitten, or pet of your boy P. Ross. I'm already attached to it. Anyway, your boy Robert De Niro, also a screen legend, Christopher Walken, and back then he was pretty much up and coming, and a screen legend also who just received an award, one of the highest awards you can receive as a civilian, the Medal of Freedom. Meryl Streep, she received that the other day from President Obama. She's in this film too. Legendary film, 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Now, this film is going to probably be, in my estimation, one of the most difficult films to critique. Because on the front, you got critical acclaimed filmmaking. But then at the same time, there's a dark side about this movie. And even the dark side of it has different elements to it. So that's what makes this a film interesting to critique. And I think it makes it interesting to view. Now, for you younger viewers, you may have heard some of the things I'm about to go into. But the older viewers watching this, as I go into it, you'll probably be able to relate to it almost instantly. The thing about this film that grabs everybody in the first, I'll say first 40 minutes, first 45 minutes roughly, is that it's a sort of slice of life thing. Slice of Americana, if you will. We're dealing with a group of steel workers up in the parts of Pennsylvania where the steel plants were very prominent during the majority of the 20th century, especially going as the background and backdrop of this film is. In the 1960s, 3 steel workers from the western Pennsylvania area, and there's a large scene dealing with them getting off work and everybody sort of showing their interaction with each other. And it's followed up by a wedding scene, which is very large and very upscale and very beautifully filmed by director, well, cinematographer Vilma Zsigmond and the director Michael Cimino. They got that thing pretty much the way they wanted, and they got the shots they wanted. You get to see the artistry of average people, working class people getting dressed up for an event. And they really captured, it really went into the Russian-American culture. You know, different ethnic groups in America, African-American, Irish-American, Italian-American, Jewish-American, so forth. But if there was ever any film that dealt with Russian-Americans and that ethnic group, this film tapped into it. And those scenes I was talking about, especially the wedding scene, you have references where people are toasting each other, and they go forward with the Nastarovia, which is a Russian phrase, to your health, Nastarovia. That was said in the film, and you really got the feel the director wanted us to get, that connection with these people. You didn't even see the concept of people going off to war yet. You know, that was spoken in those earlier scenes, but the attachment to that had not yet really hit you. And the way that Michael Cimino did that, that was pretty great, because no one is born a soldier. no one is born a combatant in a war that's highly political like the Vietnam War. So what Michael Cimino did was to take you into it slowly, as just average people getting off work, going to a wedding, which is a highlight of working class people. Because we know rich people, they got other things they go to. They go to galas, they go to fundraisers and things like that, and vacations in Europe and all that. But when working class people get together for a wedding, it's something special. And they kind of really showed that in that film, and that was pretty cool. But then when the movie tapped right into the experience of war, it was pretty sharp. Because near the part where the reception was over and the deer hunting scene, which is sort of classic in the fact that it showed Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken, who were buddies on the hunt. You know, and that line that Robert De Niro used to use about a deer's got to be taken with one shot. Basically what he's saying is if you're going to do deer hunting properly, you almost have to give the deer a chance. You know, it's like that man versus nature type of thing. And if you can't take him with one shot, then you almost concede to the deer that I didn't get you. You go on, you get to live. But if I track you down for most of the morning, and I get to the point where I can take you down, and I take that 30-06 rifle, and with one shot I get you, then that really makes it deer hunting. You know, I chase what I need to chase as man. I track my prey. I did it the way I was supposed to do it. I gave the deer a fair chance, and I took him out. So now I can live with myself as a deer hunter instead of just somebody going after deer. I mean, you can't go the way people when they go poaching elephants and stuff like that. You're supposed to, it's like an honor to it, you know. And that's basically what he was talking about when he said a deer's got to be taken with one shot. And when that scene was over, then we got brought into the whole Vietnam aspect pretty sharp. Now, it's been said the movie could have used any kind of war for backdrop. It didn't have to be Vietnam. But it chose Vietnam for a reason. But primarily, the centermost, the theme of the movie, the centermost scene of the movie, the scene that the whole movie revolves around, is the classic scene where Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and John Savage are persuaded by their captors, the Viet Cong, to play a game of Russian roulette. Now, the torture of prisoners is something that's been going on for years. But the way Michael Cimino drew up this scene, you have to say, of all the emotional scenes in the history of Hollywood, you could probably count on less than 2 or 3 fingers scenes that draw that kind of emotion. And Michael Cimino drew that up perfect. Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and John Savage played their roles. And in my take, you know, Robert De Niro has shown some outstanding acting ability throughout his career. But this is the centerpiece of his career as far as I'm concerned. And the scene in which him and Christopher Walken had decided that they were going to get out of there. And in order to get out of there, they were going to go ahead and put as many bullets in the gun as possible. Now, the way Russian roulette goes, you know, you take a 6-chamber gun, you put a bullet in it, put the gun to your head, and empty the chamber until you get to the live round. Well, there's one aspect of seeing the fact that if you put more bullets in there than there are empty chambers, then you are racketing up the odds of not coming out alive. Or in order to devise the escape from the situation they were in, Robert De Niro's character had decided that there's got to be 3 bullets in that gun. So we're talking about a 6-chamber gun with 3 bullets. Basically a 50-50 chance of living. When Robert De Niro put that gun to his head, what came out of him, that raw emotion, that was his way of basically telling his captors, the Viet Cong, mentally, you will not defeat me. If I have to put 3 bullets in this gun, 3 empty chambers, and 3 live rounds, and put it to my head in order to get out of this trap you put me in, then I'm going to do that. And what that was relating to anybody, whether you're in a war situation, whether you're being captured or whatever, when you have determined that whatever it is that's adverse to you at that moment, whatever it is that is your foe, whatever it is or whoever it is that's your adversary, when you decide within your heart, you will not break me, you will not defeat me. If I have to push myself to the brink to overcome what you're doing, I will do it. That's exactly what Robert De Niro did. And when he put that gun to his head, he erupted with all that emotion out of his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was determined that he was not going to be defeated by the situation or by the captors. And that was acting at its 100% finest. I have not seen anything like that in all the acting that I've witnessed in watching films. And to that, I give Robert De Niro total kudos. And that also added to his legend of being an actor who can be zeroed in and focused totally in that character and in that moment. And all that raw passion that he had in his eyes and that would be displayed with his facial expressions, that added to that legend. And that to me is one of the most memorable parts of the movie. Now, after Robert De Niro got home, he took on another essence that really captured America at that time, 1978, 1979. Almost the way now in the year 2014, Iraq war veterans and Afghan war veterans coming home, there's almost like they're sort of lost. If you get to talking to them, now of course we have a more sympathetic society. So when someone talks about post-traumatic stress disorder, there's something that people can relate with, those who have it, and then those who don't have it at least have a caringness about them. So when someone's walking around and they seem like they can't fit in, they can't get back into that old groove they had before they became combatants, there's a more sympathy, there's more of a sympathetic feeling in the world in dealing with that. But back then in 78 and 79, you had that Vietnam War veteran walking around 10 years removed from a war that America was trying to forget. America was in a denial state. And so you take that coupled with someone that can't really put together why he can't be the person he used to be, you get that shell of a man. And Robert De Niro portrayed that excellently in that feel when it was like all his friends wanted to try to connect with him, but he just wouldn't let him come in. He had built up a wall because he said he was distant, you know. And it was around that time in the film that Meryl Streep used a line that I think sums up that movie, and it sums up life in a lot of ways, at least with my life. Now, without going into detail, but I went through a lot of tough things back around the time I was about 26. And it was like a lot of bewilderment going on in my life. But the line that Meryl Streep used, I'm sure that everybody that's gone through something can relate to. When she looked at Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep said, "Did you ever think life would turn out like this?" It's like, you know, when you're a kid in high school or something like that, especially around that time when you're about to be a senior, you're about to graduate, and you got the whole world ahead of you, whether you go to college or whether you go in the military or whatever you're going to embark upon life. But then somewhere around the time when you're almost 30, or maybe when you're about to be 40, and all the plans you had and everything, and then sometimes it can be summed up with, did you ever think life would turn out like this? And it's something you have to ask yourself, at least make that statement to yourself, because it's almost like a statement, because you know life's not the way you want to be. But then you have to push another button and say, okay, whatever went down, but I'm going to have to make the best of it from here on out. But that question that she asked him, every one of us, if we be honest with ourselves, we have to say and ask, we have to ask ourselves that question, and then realize that life was not meant to be fulfilling all your hopes and dreams. It's just not like that. But it's okay though. At least ask yourself the question and come to grips with that, and then try to move on. And I thought that line was perfect for that, especially that at that point in the film. Now, the movie is a character-driven movie, so there's some parts in the script and the screenplay that may not all connect completely, and that's okay, because it's a character-driven film. So we see Robert De Niro's character being put into the hellishness of war, and then the hellishness of being captured, and then having to deal with putting his life together after he came back home. Christopher Walken's character went through the same thing, only he didn't get to come back home. He's basically dealing with everything as being sort of like a casualty of war, so to speak, until the end of the movie, in which you get to see why he was captured like that, or why the film had him in that kind of situation under those circumstances. It's like the film was using his character for that purpose, so that at the end of the film, you can see that the tragedy of war. Sometimes the war doesn't just end when the politicians get together and sign an armistice, or when one of the sides submits to the other side and say surrender. Sometimes war keeps on going. And in that case, Christopher Walken's character was used perfectly for that. And John Savage's character, as someone who basically had given up to what war had taken from him. In this case, it was the use of his legs. But he rebounded at the end with the help of Robert De Niro's character when he went to visit him in the VA hospital. That was important, because he could have just gave up on life, and basically he was content with living the rest of his days in a VA hospital in a wheelchair. But Robert De Niro's character pushed through, showing the bond of friendship when he basically spoke to him and said, I'm taking you home. You know, and when John Savage told him, first John Savage resisted, but then when John Savage said, do what your heart tells you, man, it was almost like he was giving in to, okay, this is my friend, and he wants to do what's best for me. So John Savage was openly letting Robert De Niro take charge of the situation. And because he knew Robert De Niro was trying to do what was best for him. And that was pretty special. That was pretty special. Now, as I said, the film had, it's hard to critique because there's a dark side about this. Now, everything I just said now is a credit to the film because of the acting. And I'm going to pretty much, I'll say what Michael Cimino did in taking the actors and getting the most he got out of them. Okay. And as a paid performer, that's all you can do is you take a script and you get into the character and then you go for it. Well, the dark side of it is that if the screenwriter writes some things in there that is flawed, and if not flawed, you can even say just foul. That's when we get into the dark side of this. Now, as I said, the central part of the film is the Russian roulette. Viet Cong soldiers having captured American GIs, persuading them to play Russian roulette, which is a form of torture. But in reality, it is a documented fact that American GIs, having captured Vietnamese soldiers, forced them to play Russian roulette. And in case in point, a soldier by the name of Bobby Garwood, he even testified to the fact, that's an American soldier, that he did witness American soldiers forcing Vietnamese soldiers to play Russian roulette. Now that's a tragedy in itself, that something that's truth gets somehow flipped over to make it seem like one side that was the perpetrator of the evil was being victimized. That's bad enough. But as the film was released in 1978, then released to a broader, well, the film premiered in 1978, but it was released to a broader audience in 1979. Unfortunately, there are some people over in Finland, and I'm sure other places, well, in fact, definitely some other places as time went on, but in Finland, 5 people were recognized to have been killed by playing Russian roulette. Now, why someone watch a movie and say, hey, let's do what we saw in the movie, well, that's showing some kind of mental instability in itself. But that's a tragedy, too, that the film had inspired some people over there to play Russian roulette, and then you got victims of people being killed. Now, later on, some people over here in the United States had some stories that were related to that. One in particular, well, at least I know there was one story that is documented, where a young kid had been watching The Deer Hunter, and he decided to play Russian roulette, and he killed himself. So that's a tragedy about that. But back on that other part, when I say there's a dark side about it. Now, to a lot of you young viewers, you may not have heard of a director by the name of D.W. Griffith. Well, he did a film around 100 years ago called Birth of a Nation. And in that film, he criminally depicted black soldiers who were ex-Union soldiers right around the time where the backdrop of the film was the end of the Civil War, the Reconstruction period. And those who know your history know that the Union soldiers went down to the southern states and pretty much acted like an occupation army until things could get back together again. Well, in this film by D.W. Griffith, Birth of a Nation, it criminally depicted black soldiers as being some kind of sex-starved, hungry rapists who wanted to do nothing but rape white women. And by showing this, it then so-called gave an excuse for the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, because they supposedly, because of the criminal actions, the alleged criminal actions of black soldiers who allegedly wanted to do nothing but rape white women, had the Ku Klux Klan acting like some kind of heroes, that they had to come to the rescue to save these white women from these black men who were perverts, according to the way D.W. Griffith was showing it. Now that's criminal, because at that time, the African American culture had not been thoroughly exposed to the rest of the world. And not only that, but there were an enormous amount of white people in America who really didn't have a lot of contact with African Americans anyway. So when you get someone who portrays black people like that, then someone who has no contact with black people at all, for the first time is introduced to the African American culture by watching something like that, it's criminal. And therefore, even though the film gets acclaim for its technical achievements, I'm talking about D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, but what it did, in essence, in the manipulation of black people and showing black men the way they did, that was criminal, and therefore I refuse to give it any accomplishment, because the essence of it is criminal propaganda, no different than what Dr. Joseph Goebbels did with the Nazi Party over in Europe in the 30s and 40s. So that's the way I feel about D.W. Griffith's movie. Now, the reason I bring that up, what Michael Cimino did is showing the whole Russian roulette thing over in Vietnam. Again, I told you about how it was chronicled that Barbie Garwood showed American soldiers forcing Vietnamese prisoners to play Russian roulette. Well, in the film The Deer Hunter, later on in the film, you see where apparently it's some kind of cult following or activity or whatever you want to call it, like a sporting event, where people were playing Russian roulette. Now, of course, if you bring this and you say, well, can you show me an instance where this was going on? The response could be, can you show me where it wasn't going on? Because around the world, you know, there's got to be somebody foolish enough to play a game like that for money. But the criminal element is, if someone is not familiar with the whole Vietnamese culture, and they watch this movie for the first time, they could go, hey, these people are like that. Well, these people aren't like that. You know, the Asian culture is one that's strongly rooted in history and tradition and family-oriented people. And their respect for life is a lot more than other cultures. Of course, you're going to have people who are evil and despicable and murderous in all the cultures. But by and large, for the most part, the Asian culture is one that doesn't promote violence, because there's nowhere near the amount of criminal activity as far as murders and first-degree murders and people being killed with firearms over there like there is over here or in other cultures. So that's criminal in doing that. And that's part of the dark side about this movie. To close this movie up, to show you the essence of these last things I was saying, in 1979, April the 9th, I believe, the Academy Awards, when the ceremony took place in which the film The Deer Hunter received this Academy Award for Best Picture. And again, I want to say, I'm okay with the film getting Best Picture, and I'm okay with all the critical acclaim given to Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken and John Savage and Meryl Streep, because as paid performers, they did what they were supposed to do. They took the script, they got into their characters, and they delivered. But the dark side of it is, okay, I've already explained the dark side, but to give emphasis to the dark side, at the night of the Academy Award ceremony, April the 9th, 1979, there were protests outside of the Academy Award ceremony with Vietnam veterans protesting this film. Now, we know Vietnam War veterans have protested the Vietnam War, but they were specifically protesting this film because they knew that aspect I'm telling you about, the criminal aspect, that you're trying to portray the Vietnamese, and I'm sure that the Vietnamese people did some torture. Vietnamese, not people, Vietnamese soldiers did do some torture to Americans who were captured. Case in point, Senator John McCain is well documented what he went through his 5 years in solitary. But to show it like a culture of people playing Russian roulette as if it was like the way we see Monday Night Football, okay, Russian roulette. Let's play a game. Let's make it a party. Let's make it where we have groups of people coming, like going to the casino to bet on people's lives. What you're doing is you're degrading the culture when you do something like that. When you don't have solid fact that this is something that went on continuously, you know, and that's the criminalization of it. And that's not cool. And when the war veterans were protesting it, that gave it the emphasis so that you could see there was an element of people in America who felt that this shouldn't be, and it should be stopped. Now, the film won its Academy Award, and you can't take away from the raw emotion of the film or the acting. That's all good. But the dark side of that movie is that you took something that was a fallacy, something that had no truth in it, just so that you could empower the screenwriter to write things for the performers to perform. And then when you have to go that route to do something, then that's not cool. But overall, by and large, I still give a high recommendation, and I do endorse the 1978 classic, The Deer Hunter. Recommended viewing. And kudos to my boy Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken, Meryl Streep, John Savage, and all the rest. This is your boy JQ Vault, and I'm out.